How on earth can these two mics be compared? The AKG D112 and the D12. I've never heard two mics that sound so different from each other in my whole life. Okay, I'm Joshua Lutz. Welcome back to JML Recording. The D12, probably one of the most famous kick drum mics of all time, obviously famously used on all the Beatles' Abbey Road recordings. The D20 was also used on their kick drum stuff. The difference between the D12, the D20, the D25 is the 20 and the 25 have a transformer inside. This does not. It's just the mic mount here. If you see a little bump out over here, a little pregnant D12, that is the transformer. And the D25 has the fancy yoke. That's really the only difference. And honestly, having heard the D12 and the 20 and the 25 side by side, you barely can tell a difference. The D12 is a phenomenal kick drum and bass amp and guitar and vocal mic. The D112, very clicky, very thin. It goes from 20 hertz to 17,000 hertz or 17 kilohertz. The D12 goes from 57 hertz to 21,000 hertz or 21 kilohertz. And I will say that before I had the D12, I was using the D112. And I could only get a good sound out of it when I paired it with a subkick. By the way, if you're looking for a good subkick, Posiden Audio makes these, and for like 150 bucks, they're absolutely amazing. It's all 3D printed. Super nice guy. You can find him on Reverb. Check the links below if he's still making them. You can actually build one of these yourself out of any 6 or 8 inch speaker. In the 70s and the 80s, what a lot of guys would do is they would just take an NS10 speaker cone, the woofer side, and they would just route the left and the right to a mic input. Because don't forget, you can sing into a pair of headphones and you can listen to music through a microphone. And if that's blowing your mind and you've never heard that before, try it with a cheap mic you don't care about, because a speaker is just a mic wired in reverse and vice versa. So if you ever have a stuck diaphragm, one of the ways that technicians will get that diaphragm unstuck after years of being stuck is to play audio through it, and it'll pop that diaphragm loose and often fix a stuck moving coil dynamic microphone. Not something you want to try with a Precious U47, but I digress. So this is how I was getting my sound, my kick drum sound. Now, a quick forewarning, if you are a heavy metal head and you love that clicky sound that you get with the D112, you're not gonna like the D12. A lot of the diaphragms in these used D12s you see online are shot. This one, in fact, needed a lot of work when I got it in the mail, which I did myself, but these diaphragms are known for losing their bass response. And the reason that is because they're very sensitive. These things cap out at like 98 dB. Now a kick drum can go up to about 110, 120 dB. So the sensitivity on these is not really intended for a kick drum. And that's why at Abbey Road Studios, if you watch, there's an interview out there of the guy who's been maintaining the Abbey Road's mics for the last 40, 50 years or whatever. And he says that they used to go through these like crazy. And there'd always be a pile of D12 sitting on his bench because they're damaged so easily. So you gotta be careful with a D12. Even though it's a dynamic mic and we're used to throwing SM58s out of 10-story windows and they still work, a D12, a little more sensitive. If you want these things to last, put this on your inside and this on the outside, and you'll pair these two and get a great sound. And there is great application for the D112. The subharmonic frequencies the D12 picks up negates the need for a subkick. If you have the money for a FET 47 and you want to upgrade, great. By all means, buy one. But if you're budget friendly like I am, you can pick one of these up, a D12 for about $600 all day on eBay or Reverb. And by the way, the D12 VR, it's like the KM184s versus the KM84. I just don't know why they can't get it right. AKG cannot make a good microphone lately. The C12 VR, I was like, oh, I must have a bad one. Years later, I tried another one. I eventually gave up and bought the real deal, and I never looked back. The C414s compared to the old 414 EBs, night and day. The 451 EBs, mind-blowing. They're great pencil mics. The D12 compared to the 12 VR. The VR is 17 hertz to 17 kilohertz. That's the frequency range of a D12 VR, opposed to the D12 that's 57 to 21,000 hertz. Why did they do that? Why don't they just make another replica of a killer microphone? You know, there's limited supply of these out there. If AKG would just make a D12 clone, call it the D12 MK2. And what does VR mean? Virtual reality? What are we talking about here? So here we go, ready? Listen to the same recording of the kick drum in the same time, coincident pair, right on the outside, about 4 inches outside of the sound hole of a Ludwig 1975 Maple Classic. Ready? D112. D12. Warms the cockles of my heart. Now listen to the D112 with a subkick. And now just listen to the D12 by itself. Still better, right? Now listen to the D12 with the subkick. It's like you don't need it. The D12 by itself is just great. And I understand maybe that's not the kick drum sound you are looking for. If you're in a speed metal band or a prog rock band, that's not the sound. You might actually like this. All right, now let's hear them all together, side by side. You hear that? That's the capsule just flopping around in there like a rag doll. So we're gonna take this apart and see if we can fix it. You know what else? I can already tell just by looking at this. Let's see if it passes the paper test. There's a foam on the inside of this, like a furry foam. On old U67s, they would put a little yellow foam ring around the base of the capsule in order to absorb any stray frequencies and give the capsule sound like a dead, nice, quiet sound without reflection. And they've done that to the inside of this, which I'm sure adds to the magic of the microphone. However, we're gonna see if it passes the paper test. Take a piece of paper and you just wipe it on my, oh, whoa, did you see that? Every time you hit a kick drum, it loosens up some of those fibers, and what do? They stick to the diaphragm. So that's a problem. I'm gonna just get like a toothbrush, scrub it, vacuum it, and leave it. There's a screw that's supposed to hold this bracket to the side of the diaphragm. It is missing. I could go poking around with this thing, a little magnet of my own, but it's probably not gonna pull the screw out. Oh, it worked. Look at that. First of all, the guy used electrical tape, which is already failing. So this all needs to be redone with something called shrink tubing. It gets very hot and it creates the shrink tube. You've seen it on wires before. This ain't new to you. The other thing I see is the screw. Can you see it right there? That's what we're missing. That's what came loose in transit. And there it is. Oh, there is another screw floating around inside of here. Also, I can see that this screw is about to fall out. So the very first thing I'm gonna do is just tighten this screw right here. The next thing I'm gonna do is, I don't like to poke around with a metal prod. I like to use a wooden toothpick or a chopstick. Especially if you're ever working with capacitors that hold a charge, like those big caps, they call them death caps inside of a guitar amp. You better be using something wood. If you're poking around with a screwdriver, they say that you better hope that your heart valve is open when you touch a death cap, because you have a 50% chance of living through it, because the cap could discharge enough electricity to stop your heart. Either way, even with these that don't have any electric charge passing through, just a good habit to always poke around with a wooden chopstick or a toothpick. And what you're looking for is a loose or broken connection, a cold solder joint or a screw that's loose, and 3 hours later we're all finished. I just want to show you, look what I found inside of this mic. Floating around behind the capsule, magnetized to the back of the diaphragm. So when you're pulling these mics apart, like I said, just poke around, see what's inside, see what's loose, see what's broken, and if it's something you can't fix, send it to a mic tech. But you might get lucky and it's just a loose wire, and you just take your little soldering iron, and once you learn proper solder technique, it's so easy. If you've ever used a glue stick, you can figure this out. It is not complicated. 350 degrees, apply a dab of solder, let it dry. Don't move it for the 3 seconds it's drying so you don't get a cold solder. Let it go, you're done. Don't get gloppy. Do a very small amount of solder. If you're soldering wires together, use heat shrink. There's not a lot to it, folks. You got this. This is JML Recording. I'm Joshua Lutz. Thanks for watching.